the Self and Society podcast, exploring what it means to flourish as an individual and a community. This is your host, Ari Armstrong. Music by Jordan Smith, cjsclassical.com. Please join Self in Society at Substack. Our guest today is Sheriff Bill Masters of Telluride, San Miguel County, Colorado. Masters is the longest serving sheriff in Colorado history, having taken over the position in 1980. Masters also is the author of the 2001 book, Drug War Addiction, Notes from the Front Lines of America's #1 Policy Disaster. I, along with Richard and Don Lamping, helped to edit that book. By way of background, Colorado legalized marijuana for medicinal purposes in 2000 and for recreational use in 2012. So how you doing, Bill? Good to talk to you again.
It's always a pleasure, Ari. Thank you so much for your work on that book. That was a fun project many years ago, and in its own small way, it might have changed some people's minds.
Yeah, I think so. I hate to break it to you up front, though, but you are not the longest serving sheriff in U.S. history. I looked this up. That goes to Dwight E. Radcliffe of Pickaway County, Ohio. He served from 1965 to 2013. So you're going to have to run a couple more times to catch up with him.
Jeez. I don't know if I got it in me or not.
Well, I think you've done your share for King and Country at this point. How did you get past the term limits there? And what's it been like being sheriff for this long? How do you keep the position fresh and current?
I often tell people that I remember my first day of as sheriff and most of today. And the rest of it's just been a big blur. So it's been a long time. We've seen a lot of changes in Telluride and San Miguel County and in the business of policing itself. But there are some fundamental rules that have not changed. I had a chance to be in London earlier this year, and I had an old Bobby who used to work guarding the Queen, help guard the Queen, show me around downtown London. And we went into Westminster Abbey, and there was the statue of Sir Robert Peel, the founder of the Metropolitan Police Department. And the name Bobby comes from Robert Peel. And they have a statue of him there. And I still have Robert Peel's principles posted in my office. So there's been a lot of changes, but also from those times, there's still some things that are fundamentally true about peacekeeping. I never used the term law enforcement. That's ridiculous. 30,000 laws in the state of Colorado, over 400 traffic violations next time you get behind the wheel of a car. Think about that. Think of what they could possibly be. And so we don't enforce the law because there's just way too many of them. Best we can do is try to preserve a semblance of the peace. And that's what we try to do here. And if you call yourself a peace officer, as opposed to a law enforcement officer, you look at things differently. And so that's what I've done to try to make it through all those years. I have to admit, I didn't start out that way. I as I've shared with you in the past, I started out thinking the law is the law, and I saw what I saw, as the witch would say. And the reality is laws are just some kind of weird guideline for human behavior, and we can't possibly enforce all of them. So we try to do the best we can using good common sense. And really, most police officers out on the street, peace officers, I should say, do the same thing.
So what troubles your county these days? I see you have a livestock rustler sign on your door. A lot of search results seem to be about tourists dying up in the mountains, taking a fall off a cliff or something.
Yeah, that sign was one from the 1980s, early 80s. And I have that sign. A friend of mine gave me a sign the other day. The same sign. It's a metal sign, and we had a number of them posted throughout the county in the 80s. But he found one in a flea market, and it was all rusted and everything. And he bought that for me and gave it to me. It's on the side of my garage in Telluride. But it was kind of a fun sign at the time because we were concerned about livestock rustling, and we still are to a degree, but that's gotten a little bit more sophisticated in the way animals are tagged and processed, et cetera. So it doesn't happen to the degree as it used to. There's a lot of issues in San Miguel County, like there is every place else, probably with a lot less frequency. We've had our occasional homicide cases. We've had the same kind of things that happen every place else in the world happen here with humans and their behavior, but just with a very, not the frequency as you find in cities, et cetera. Most of our people are really are pretty decent people, as are most of our visitors. We're really fortunate in that way. We also, though, being a sheriff, I'm responsible for the search and rescue, for the corrections or the jail, and the court security, civil process, and all the court process, and also wildfire control in the county to manage that wildfire control. So that takes a lot of work these days. We're very concerned about our wildfires, as we've noticed throughout the state, even in January in Boulder, this terrible incident that occurred. That could occur anywhere in the state at any time. All you need is some dry vegetation and some wind source and an ignition source, and we could have a lot of homes destroyed and a lot of people killed. And we're really fortunate that it turned out so well in that Boulder event, as far as what could have happened if it was a few hours later and people were at home and you couldn't get notified in time. Something along those lines, couldn't evacuate in time. So that's a big concern of ours, something that we really, really work on to try to figure out how we're going to get out of this area if we did have a big fire like that. How are we going to communicate with our visitors who are here? Because sometimes the visitors are going to be several times our permanent population. During a festival, we might have 20,000 people in the Telluride Valley that normally has a permanent population of maybe 4,000 people. So how do we communicate with these people? How do we get them out of that particular environment, out of danger, if a wildfire was threatening? So that's certainly a big issue that we deal with here. We've had a 30,000 acre fire, didn't lose any structures, but that was mainly by the grace of God. And so anyway, I think we're going to be on fire, and every sheriff in the state is worried about that.
I live in Westminster, so I could see that Superior Louisville fire across the horizon through the valley. So it never put me in evacuation or pre-evacuation, but we could see the flames out of my back wall window facing north. Oh. So yeah, that was quite. I think it got over 1,000 residences plus some commercial structures.
Yeah, terrible.
How did you fare through the pandemic? Did you get it early on? How did that affect your work and life in the San Miguel Valley?
It still does. We have two of our correctional officers out on COVID today. So we still know that COVID is out there, but that was obviously one of our biggest challenges ever. I was on the part of the Unified Command in dealing with the early outbreak and the shutdowns and try to figure out the proper thing to do for our county. And it was very difficult. That was a real challenge, and it continues to be one to this day. I am fortunate enough that I never caught COVID, and myself, I've got I'm over 70 now, so I got 2 boosters and the original 2, and I'm blessed that I haven't had it yet, but I use that as yet. So it was a tough time for our county, and a lot of stress to people, a lot of mental illness, and certainly another big factor that we've been trying to change in our agency anyway, to eliminate the people that are mentally ill from our facility, and try to get them in some other program other than being in jail. And we certainly used to do that in Colorado when I started my career. People who were in crisis were had a place to go. We had the state hospital, and I think we had a perfect storm of both liberal and conservative politics coming together. The conservatives not wanting to pay for the state hospital anymore and taking care of these people, and of course the liberals watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and deciding to get all these people out of the institutions because they were being supposedly mistreated. But really, the real mistreatment is putting all these people out on the street and having them have to fend for themselves when they're completely insane. And we see the terrible homeless camps and the assaults, the sexual assaults, the terrible living conditions that these people are forced to endure because they're mentally ill or they're in crisis. And that's a real mark on our society, the way we treat people who are in crisis or who are addicted to drugs or alcohol, et cetera. And it's just to have them set up in these homeless camps is a black mark on our society.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to that. That's a tough one. And I went into Denver recently and saw one of these larger homeless camps in northern part of downtown. And clearly, this is not an ideal place to be living. I don't know if the answer is decentralized treatment facilities where people can go, or I don't know exactly, but obviously we've not found the solution yet.
Yeah, and some of the people in the homeless camps are down on their luck, and they're a different group, but vast numbers of them are people that are suffering from, are in mental health crisis or are suffering from addiction, and it's really hard to deal with them because many of them don't want to be placed in places where their behavior is controlled, but the reality is we're doing them a disfavor by treating them like this way, and I think it's terrible.
Well, you mentioned politics. Back in the day, we were both libertarians for a while. Now you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican. So I wanted to ask you how you see the parties these days. And a news bit, I noticed that one Telluride man was charged for his role in the January 6th, 2021 Capitol invasion. So how do you see where the parties are headed and how they've evolved in the last couple decades since we were working together on that book?
Yeah, I see a big change, and certainly in the way that the two parties relate to each other, and that's really a shame. It seems like we used to have some really good politicians in Colorado. Senator Dan Noble, who was from our county, was a Republican senator, state senator, and was known for his abilities to work together with Democrats to solve the problems of our state. And I think he was the president of the Senate for a while. But anyway, he was a real example to me of being able to work together with both parties, and we've lost that. We've lost that to a terrible degree, and I'm not going to blame one party or the other. Everybody wants to do that. It's Republicans' fault or Democrats' fault. It's both of our faults for not being able to sit down and come together to solve the problems. And the people really want that. I think the radical or reactionary sides of both parties are the ones that end up getting their candidates chosen in the primary process or in the different ways that we choose our candidates, and that leaves behind the moderates that might have some really good ideas on working together to solve the problems facing us, and we don't have that anymore. It's all about rhetoric and seeing how nasty you can be to each other, and that's just I don't want any part of that. I'm not that kind of Democrat. I wasn't that kind of Republican. I wasn't that kind of libertarian. It seems like we all have to work together. And if you want to be, mean and cruel and a smart ass out there to the other people who have taken their time to serve in our legislative branches, to hell with you. I don't like you, and I don't want you to represent us anymore if all you have is meanness and smart ass comments.
Well, I should notice that you are up for re-election yourself this fall during the big election, and so that would put you up for another 4 years as sheriff. So one thing I've observed is, since I was in the Libertarian Party, I think parts of the Libertarian Party, even then, but since then especially, have really taken a dark turn, with even strangely libertarians coming out as anti-immigrant and promoting racist commentary, that kind of, in some elements. But now, of course, the Republican aspects of the Republican Party have just gone Looney Tunes. And the reason I'm a Republican is because back in 2016, I was going to put in whatever effort I could to try to keep Donald Trump from winning the primary. And obviously I was unsuccessful, even though Colorado did not go for Trump back then. So I'm officially a Republican, but I'm not too happy with where much of the Republican Party is headed. We have obviously better representatives and worse ones. So I don't know I wish that there were more blue dog Democrats, more level-headed Democrats in the mix along the lines of the model that you've laid out.
Well, I consider myself a blue dog Democrat, and that's really unpopular with the some of the progressive wings of the Democratic Party. They don't like blue dogs, and I'm clearly one, and so at times I'm not real popular in the Democratic Party either. But I wish we had something where people could come together on and stop this divide, because it's definitely hurting our country. And I agree with you. Some of those things with the Republican Party being seemingly anti-immigrant, and I'm pro-immigrant. I like immigrants, and I think so many of them have contributed so much to our country, and that first generation of people that come and work hard while coming to the United States. And I happened to attend a swearing in of new immigrants a few years back, when my wife became a U.S. citizen. She was born in Newfoundland. So she's almost a Canadian, as they say up there. But it was hundreds upon hundreds of people being sworn in as new American citizens. It was a really dynamic, fun group from all over the world, every possible country, every possible race. It was a great day, and we need to continue that. That's the magic of our country, and that's why other countries that aren't like that. You take China, who don't like immigrants, don't like people from different countries, and they're losing population like crazy. They say that by the end of this century, they're going to have a third of their population that they have now, and that's terrible for a country. That means economic disaster for that country, and you just can't have that. We're going to have immigrants, and smart immigrants, well educated, and immigrants that are also hard workers, and we have a lot of them that have come here over the years. But that being said, we also need a legal system, and the legal system should come as a worker program of some time and some kind. And when that happens, then people can go back and forth across the border and have the proper documentation, and hopefully can be deported if they commit crimes, or we determine that workers are no longer needed because of our economy or something. And we used to do it that way. And for some reason, that's a very limited program now.
I wanted to switch to drug war because that's what we worked on. And you started your book back in 2001, saying the so-called war on drugs is itself an addiction. But I'm not sure exactly how your views have evolved on this issue. A few years ago, Colorado Public Radio wrote that you stepped back from that in some ways, but still believe in, quote, providing addicts mental health instead of criminal prosecution. So how do you think about that issue generally these days?
I'm not sure how far I've stepped back from it, but we certainly have the issues in our face now that that some people fail to recognize. People still say, "Oh, there's good drugs and bad drugs," and there aren't. They're inanimate objects, and it depends on how they're used. Unfortunately, peacekeeping has a role in that. Sometimes it's aberrant behavior, but people should be judged by their aberrant behavior, not by what drug or blaming it on a particular drug. That's unacceptable in my mind. But I'm not certain that just being a drug addict, using drugs, should be a crime. I still believe that. And I think there's that has never worked. We have never solved or arrested our way out of a drug wave. And I call these things tend to go in waves. You got a crack wave, you got a cocaine wave, you got fentanyl wave, and then a meth wave, and then it all repeats itself again. But we've never been able to stop it by arresting our way out of it. And partially our fault. The peacekeeping agencies, raised their hand. We can solve that. We can arrest our way out of it. We arrest enough people, they'll stop using these drugs. That doesn't work. And anybody who says it does is just not dealing in reality. It doesn't work. You cannot stop drug use in a free society by arresting your way out of it. And we are a free society, and I think one of the rights should be that your body is yours, and you decide what substances go into it. And I think it's a fundamental human right.
It seems like everybody says my body, my choice when it's their pet issue. But when it's your body, I'm not sure if it should be your choice. It's just my body, my choice.
Yeah. Well, once again, if we stressed on fine, take whatever you want, but you've got to be responsible. We're going to hold you responsible for your behavior. And I think that would be a better approach to do with it from the very beginning of education of your of children. You should start educating them that what's a good thing to take, what's a bad thing to take, what's a good thing to eat, what's a bad thing to eat. And we try to teach our children those kinds of things, but to go and say, well, you know what, that's really the policeman's job to tell you what to do, take and not take. And that's a mistake. And that just flat doesn't work. We prove it every day. And now we have this terrible fentanyl problem. And, I think the Chinese, the most controlled society on the planet, is turning a blind eye to, at least, if not encouraging, the manufacturing of this drug and the importation to Mexico, and then it gets across the border, and people are using it. Well, fentanyl is a unique substance because enough to, as I understand it, give every person in the United States a dose of it can fit into a large suitcase. So our chance of controlling it, of controlling the supply of it, is zero. We're not going to control the supply of it. And any attempt by the legislature to keep on saying that, we need harsher penalties, it's just the same old drug war BS. That doesn't work. And So we're going to go through this whole fentanyl thing, just like we did the opioid, the manufacturing of opioids and the distribution of them through pharmacies and pharmaceutical companies legally. Now we're going to go through this whole thing with fentanyl and being completely out of control. Well, we need to step back and look at, why are people doing this? Why are what's the solution? What's the solution to get people off of this drug? And I think you put all your smart people together to figure that out. Leave the peace officers outside the room and try to figure out as if there are no laws. There are no laws against this. Nobody's going to go to jail for it. How do we control it? And if you looked at it that way, I think the medical community and the mental health community might come up with some ideas that we haven't thought of. And that would be my hope anyway.
I'm sure you're super popular at the cocktail parties with the police, with the bigwig police officers in the state.
Well, for some reason, we keep on raising our hands that we can, give us this job, We can do this. We can't do it, and you just got to be honest about it. We failed. We failed repeatedly, and we tried hard. I tried really hard. I arrested so many people, and we did everything we can to stop all this. People have been shot over it. People have been sentenced to jail, wasted their whole life in jail over smuggling pot, and now you can buy it anywhere you want to in Colorado. So, before it was legalized, you could buy it anywhere you want to in Colorado. So it just failed completely, and to not learn from that is really a mistake.
Well, my son is 6 years old, and we've already had numerous conversations about drugs, including alcohol. In fact, we have a relative who almost died from a drunk driver smashing into his vehicle. So that we've had some serious conversations about that already. We'll see how that pans out in the long run. Hope that we can instill enough common sense over the years. I know that some people they're just more prone to addictive behaviors of all kinds, whether it's gambling or drugs or whatever. So do you see drug addiction as more of a disease or more of a choice?
Well, I think it is both to a degree. We have to admit there's a certain number of people that they take one drink of alcohol, the rest of their life they're an alcoholic, and the rest of their life they have to have alcohol every single day, or they go through some kind of meaningful recovery system, or they reach rock bottom and develop a support system that gets them off of that. But there are certain people like that. I know, kids in when I was growing up in Los Angeles, that they took one puff of a cigarette, and the rest of their life they smoked cigarettes constantly. And there's people like that. And same thing goes with every drug you can think of. There's some people that can take, oxycodone, because they've been injured, and it's a painkiller. And at the end of when the prescription runs out and they're well again, or the injury's over with, they never want to take it again. And there's other people, they take one of those things and they are addicted for the rest of their life. And for some reason, we placed a moral value on it. Well, that guy is an oxy freak, and so therefore he's morally bad. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think there's just certain people that their brain, their chemicals in their brain are wired that they're going to be an addict, and you need to get those people into the proper treatment programs to help them. And I think as society we have to just realize X number of people are going to be that way. And now what do we do about it? How do we help those people, or if we make a decision that we don't want to help them? whatever it is, we need to admit that's going to happen to a certain number of people, and no drug is perfect, and no drug is good, and no drug is bad, because some people are just flat going to be addicted to it. And I think the same thing goes with certain eating disorders. People just can't stop eating, and they're just wired that way, and they take a lot of effort to help them. So we need to set aside that, hey, 10% of these people are just going to be a problem now. Before we even introduce the drug into society, if it's a legal drug, how are we going to deal with the people that are going to get addicted to this particular substance? And I think we need to look at the front end of that before we introduce new legal drugs. And when we're dealing with illegal drugs, we need to admit that too, that a certain number of people are just flat going to be addicted to that substance. That being said, I'm running a couple homicide investigations right now on fentanyl overdoses. If you go around distributing this stuff and you know that it's dangerous to people and can kill them, you have to accept that responsibility that you promoted a substance that was deadly. And it's even in libertarian thought, you're responsible for doing those kinds of things. You just can't go and introduce people to substances that will kill them without accepting responsibility for that homicide.
Well, the way I've looked at it, and I'm pretty hardcore libertarian on this issue, but on anything, if you're purposely or negligently distributing stuff that's inherently dangerous, like the user doesn't know what they're getting, and that's true with a lot of drugs these days. I've heard stories of people, they think they're snorting cocaine and they're snorting fentanyl, and then they die because of the fentanyl is so potent and their bodies can't handle it.
No, so you're absolutely right.
So the way I've looked at it is, there's a role for prosecution of people who intentionally or negligently distribute inherently harmful stuff. Like if you sold alcohol, like if you sold beer and it just contains some poison in it or something like that, you would be criminally responsible for that. Beer is perfectly legal, but not stuff that's of unknown toxicity, has poisons in it, or unknown dosage. So yeah, I see some role. I mean, it's a much bigger debate as to why that happens, but yeah, I mean, when you're working in that side of it, of enforcing the laws, yeah, that's rights violating behavior to give somebody a drug when they don't even know it's fentanyl, but they don't even know there's fentanyl in it, and then they result in dying or being severely hurt. So another thing you've written about quite a bit is the civil liberties aspect of the drug war, and how it tends to corrupt many police departments, or at least certain parts of police departments. It puts people needlessly at risk, harms minorities. So one thing we also worked a little bit together on some years ago was reforming the asset forfeiture system. But of course, that's still just a huge deal, where certain police departments just take people's stuff just because they have it, and then they never charge them with a crime, but they keep the stuff, or it's really hard to get that stuff back. So you have groups like the Institute for Justice, who's always, seems like every week or every other week, they're suing some government agency or another because they took somebody's stuff and they have no evidence that the person committed any crime. Then there's no-knock raids and these rapid knock raids where, it's the middle of the night, you might knock and say police, but realistically, are people inside going to know you're the police, when you're rousing them out of their sleep? There's problems with pretextual stops. Oh my God, he has a broken taillight or whatever, we're going to stop him and search his car for drugs. So how do you see those issues as having evolved, over the last couple decades or so? And I guess we can add in here, this is not strictly related to the drug war, but I want to eventually lead into how you think policing has responded to the police killings of George Floyd and Elijah McClain here in Colorado and other people, and how you see the civil liberties aspects of police departments playing out these days.
Well, to start with, back in the 70s and 80s, the drug forfeiture law was was particularly abused. In those days, the peacekeeping agencies were allowed to keep the money that they, if they seize some, so or assets, so they could sell the assets, and then they would go to that particular agency to buy police equipment or fund drug units, et cetera. And that that was really poor. That shouldn't have happened. You can't have the police going out and getting the asset for their own benefit. And we did that on a number of occasions. I think one time we got several $100,000 and an asset seizure funds off a drug case. And we built a whole new modern communication system with that money. In those days, 300,000, 200,000, a lot of money. So that just encouraged us to do more, to try to go find more assets to seize. And so finally we changed, that law was changed, and it should have been that money is governed by a system that doesn't necessarily go back to the agency, but can be used for a variety of different things, or even helping with the general budget, much like any other money that we get. It's not money that you put in, shouldn't go to the law enforcement agency without proper, I'm going to call it civilian review by elected officials, by your funding boards, the commissioners or city councils or state legislature, et cetera. So that's kind of eliminated that desire by peacekeeping agencies go out there and seize property and tie it back to the crime. Now, obviously, if it's completely ill-gotten gains, it probably shouldn't be returned to the person who basically stole the money or used illegal dealing in drugs to obtain that money. It shouldn't be given back to them. But if they can prove that it is the gains of that, it should be given to the public funding boards to decide what happens to it. Overall, certainly the drug war is pretty clear that if you were addicted to drugs and you were a white wealthy person, your addiction would be handled in one way. You'd go to Betty Ford Clinic, which was named after Betty Ford, who was the president's wife, who had a drug problem. But if you were poor, white, or Black or Hispanic, you would be treated completely different in the whole system. And I saw that even here in San Miguel County, which is a very white community. But if you were a wealthy white woman, would probably be the best thing, and got addicted to drugs and got caught with drugs, you would definitely have a completely different system dealing with you than you would if you were of a either ethnic minority or you were poor. I think that's changed. I don't think it's quite the same. Judges in our system now realize that have accepted that drug use or addiction is a problem that needs to be dealt with in different ways. And so that is not as bad as it used to be. I'm not saying that there's still the remnants of that. There's still people serving time from the 70s and 80s, right? That got caught up in the crack or even smuggling marijuana. So it is, it's still there. And it's a problem that we need to watch all the time.
I guess that's a hopeful note in noticing how things have actually improved over the last 3 decades. And I guess I'll say thank you for standing up when it wasn't necessarily easy for you to do so and pointing out some of these problems. Because, I was nobody. I was just some activist nobody cared about. But you were an elected official. And so, that took a certain amount of courage to come forward and speak out like that.
Well, there were a lot of people that agreed with me. They were afraid to come out and say it. People, the whole police industry was afraid, and everything was built around being a drug warrior. That was the best assignment you could get, and it's yeah, a lot of people understood it. They knew you couldn't stop it. They say they're going to stop it, but it never goes away, right?
So in Colorado, obviously semi-legal marijuana has not been always perfect or great. It's had its own problems. But on net, how do you think that's worked out for Colorado?
I think the biggest problem with it is the competition from the illegal marijuana market, and I think that's a problem that we still need to deal with, and peacekeepers need to come to grips with that, because it's kind of like setting up your own distillery, right? And you're gonna manufacture your own alcohol and sell it to all your friends and neighbors, and run a bar out of your garage. You can't do that. There's laws that regulate the manufacture and taxation of alcohol, as there should be, because it's an impact on society. Alcoholism is a big impact. You mentioned your friend who was injured by the drunk driver. We spend a lot of time trying to stop people from drinking and driving, and certainly the taxes on alcohol should be used to do that. And so alcohol is regulated. It's a regulated industry. And if I decide to set up a bar in my garage and sell drinks there, all the other licensed liquor establishments would immediately call the police and tell them, hey, Bill's got this illegal still, and he's serving drinks in his garage without a license and without paying taxes. Well, the same thing hasn't evolved with the illegal marijuana dealers and the legal ones. The legal ones are still going like, we're upset about that. We wish it wasn't happening, but we're not calling the police and ratting out these people that are growing their own marijuana. But I think that's going to evolve. I think we're going to have marijuana industry mature and become more like the alcohol industry, where everything is taxed and everything is regulated. It's pretty regulated right now. If you look at the legal marijuana, it's pretty amazing what the marijuana enforcement agency can do in the state of Colorado. Every single plant is barcoded from the moment it springs up to the moment it's harvested to the moment it's sold in a store, and it's all controlled by the same system that they use to control food products in the market. So they do keep a pretty tight leash on the legal marijuana market, and I think that's probably the future throughout the nation, is the kind of model that we have.
So the rationale, to switch gears, the rationale for body cameras is that it holds police accountable when they're doing the wrong thing, and it protects police. I should say peace officers more often. It's just so ingrained, when they're doing the right thing. So how do you think do you think body cameras have lived up to the promise of them?
It's an incredible Orwellian program to fit all the officers with body cameras. So everywhere they contact citizens, they're on camera, and they and anybody, it's public record, anybody can go and get that. A lot of times we dealing with people that at the worst day of their life, and they're in crisis, or maybe a family member's in crisis, and they're inviting us into their homes to try to deal with this crisis. And we're videotaping it all. and preserving it as evidence, once again, both as for criminal wrongdoing charges and for the protection of the police officer who is feared that they're going to be accused of using excessive force or something along those lines, doing something illegal. I resisted it for a while because I didn't like that intrusion into our citizens' lives. But the more and more pressure I got from my deputies to so that they could prove that they were being decent to people. They wanted to be able to prove that. They said, people don't believe us anymore. It used to be if the policeman said something that was the truth of the matter, and it was probably wrong. And there's probably definitely people that took advantage of that, officers that took advantage of that. And so now with the body camera, it more often than not absolves the officer of wrongdoing, and that's the most common use of the camera that I've seen. The second one is obviously for criminal charges to prove what the person did at that contact. But still, I have concerns about it. I'm very reluctant. I would be very reluctant to invite an officer into my house with his body camera and or her body camera. It's just I know those are running, and I just I don't want my life filmed. Thank you very much. I call the officers for a reason. I don't expect to have my household filmed, and I think that's an intrusion. And certainly in George Orwell's novels, they had cameras in every room in the house, right? So the government could look at everything that's going on in the house. In the book 1984, I believe it was. And that's kind of like it is in North Korea, and to a degree, that's the way it is in China. I haven't been to China, but I've heard that in Shanghai or one of the big cities, if you jaywalk across the street, there's a camera that automatically takes your photograph through digital imaging, recognizes you, fines you, writes you a citation, and takes the fine out of your bank account until before you get across the street. Now, that's a pretty controlled system, and but they go like, well, nobody's jaywalking, so it must be worth it. I question that. I question whether these cameras are not a complete violation of our privacy. And I think it's going to get worse no matter what, even if the government doesn't do it, or there's regulations against peacekeeping agencies or police agencies to do that. The private sector is going to do it because they want to know, they want to recognize you, they want to know what you're spending money on, and apparently there's going to be this way in the future where you as you're walking down the street, they recognize who you are, they look at your Amazon account, they know what you've bought in the past, and the ads change as you walk down the street to entice you to go into their store because they know what you've bought in the past. So it's those kinds of things that are going to occur in the private sector, which once again is going to be an incredible violation of our privacy if it's not occurring already. So,
well, I think it's worth thinking about the downsides as you discuss. I do like the attitude of the officers who want to be on record, because it's like, I'm doing the right thing and I want to be able to prove I'm doing the right thing. At least I appreciate that attitude.
That's why we went to them early. It's not required yet, but we went to them early, and we have just the volume of video that we have now is astronomical. I mean, it's just unbelievable because we're videotaping damn near everything we do. And I just flat refuse to. On some occasions it's wrong, but I'm an old school guy. But if people come into technically I should be filming you, Ari, right now. Okay. Anytime somebody, even if we don't contact them, but they contact us, we have to be filming it. So it just
You're
goes too
covered because
far.
I'm recording. So
Yeah.
I hear what
I'm
you're
not.
saying.
I'm
On your
not.
side,
I,
yeah.
you know, I don't have it. And or people come into my office, they want to talk to me. They want to talk to me about some very personal things. No, I'm not going to videotape them. They're not going to come in and see me anymore. They're going to stop asking sheriffs and officers for advice on how to solve a very personal problem.
That's
And
interesting.
that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, it seems like there should at least be some common sense exceptions along the lines of what you suggested. So I don't really know the law that well to be able to
There
comment.
are some, but everybody's afraid now because we're also now held personally liable for our actions. And this is nothing that really ticks me off. And talk about George Floyd, terrible, terrible person murdered George Floyd. There's no doubt about it. And there's absolutely zero excuse for that. It wasn't like they were in a big fight anymore and something bad happens. I could see that happening. You're in a bad fight with somebody and while that's happening, the person dies, and that that could happen to any officer. But in this particular case, there's just absolutely the person was under control, or certainly should have been to any trained officers should have been completely and totally under control. There's no reason to murder him, absolutely none whatsoever.
Well, that
And so, but at the same time, it's caused this huge change, and I fear there's going to be a backlash from that. But and the change has been a large number of officers leaving the job. Hard to recruit new young officers that might have the right attitude, but they don't want to get into the business. Making officers personally responsible for their actions. Well, it's really interesting to me. The legislature is not held personally responsible for passing the law that officers are sent out to enforce. The judges aren't held personally responsible for passing the judgment on these people. Nobody is held responsible except for the police officer. And you look at some of these terrible cases that occurred, and I'm sorry, I should know these people's that name right off the top of my head, but getting old. But there's one poor fellow that was selling cigarettes in New York City, loose cigarettes. So rather than, you could buy a cigarette for $1 from the guy. And a lot of people like that because they don't want to smoke a whole pack. They don't want to have a whole pack. They want to just buy one cigarette from the guy on the sidewalk. And this is a classic American story, right? What do? You drive up to New Hampshire where cigarettes are dirt cheap, no taxes on them or whatever. You load up your car full of cigarettes, drive them back to New York and sell them on the street for $1 a piece. And that's your livelihood. And one of the worst things you can do is get in between a man and his livelihood. And when somebody's trying to make some money that way, and what happens in New York? The New York City is losing all this tax money because they are selling loose cigarettes, untaxed cigarettes. So what do? They go to the NYPD and say, you guys have to form a special unit that goes nothing around but stops people from doing what the people want. And so they go and do that. And I know police officers, they much rather drink coffee and have pie at a diner than go out and arrest and struggle and fight with some big guy who is out there selling loose cigarettes. But that's their job. They're told to do that. But who's held responsible for it? It's the legislature that passed the tax on taxes on cigarettes that's so outrageous people want to go and find some other way to buy them. Is it because of our system says you have to buy 20 cigarettes, you can't buy just one? Did the officer make those decisions that caused this business to flourish? No. They're just told to go and enforce the law. Well, if we held the legislature responsible, or you went out and used deadly force to enforce the law that we passed, and they don't believe that's going to happen. But the reality is, every time they pass a law, every single time, that gives the police the right to use deadly force to uphold that law. Because even if it's a minor law, they go and try to arrest the person for doing it. The person resists. They're allowed to use whatever force necessary to stop that resistance. And eventually somebody's going to get hurt and die from it. So they have to accept that responsibility for every law they passed. Someone may die because we passed this law and they've decided to resist it. And, we see that in seatbelt laws. Where, okay, for their own safety, we are going to require everybody to wear seatbelts. Well, some people are just going to flat refuse to wear seatbelts. And the officer stops them and they go like, no, I'm not going to put it on, and I'm going to drive down the road because you have no right to tell me I have to wear my seatbelt. And there's just some people who are like that. And so what does the officer have to do then? The officer has to drag them through the window of the car to get them out of the car so they're stop this terrible criminal behavior of driving without the seatbelt. That's the position you put the officer in. And the legislatures need to understand that with every law, and they should put in there, officers have the right to use whatever force necessary to enforce this law, or officers should not. They should just tell people they should wear their seatbelt. And otherwise, they should be held responsible and personally liable for the laws they pass, if peace officers are going to be held personally liable as well.
That kind of sounds reasonable to me. So we'll bracket the deeper discussion of that to later, but that's interesting to see it from your point of view, because I don't talk to I hear more often from the reformists, so I hear their side of the story. And the benefits of some of these programs. So that's interesting.
During COVID, I got some calls from city council members and commissioners going like, how come you're not enforcing the ban on tourism in Telluride? People aren't supposed to come here that don't live here. This is the law we passed for COVID, emergency ordinance. People who don't live here shouldn't come here. And I said, oh, is that right? Well, who did you see? Well, there's a group of Texans walking down the street. So Texans, like white Texans, I assume. Yes, white Texans walking down the street. Okay, well, what if they were black people? Should I go and tell those people that they're not wanted in Telluride? They have to leave Telluride? Should I go and tell the homeless guy that he's got to leave Telluride because he doesn't live here? He doesn't have a big house to live in? Is that what I'm supposed to do? And they wanted me to use the kind of force that they were talking about because they didn't like a particular group that was visiting Telluride. And I'm not going to do that. And you can't do that. And so there's laws that people pass all the time, and they assume that the sheriff has to enforce them. And I tell them I don't. I don't have to enforce any law. I think I have tremendous discretion in determining what limited resources I have and how they're used in the application of the law.
What do people need to know about your job?
I think it's an honorable job. I think peacekeeping is an honorable job if you have your head on right, and you got to go every day, every single day that you go to work. You got to make sure your head's working right, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a great career for me, and I would urge other young people to look at it as a good and honorable profession. I think we do need to stress a few things. We need to stress peacekeeping over law enforcement. We need to have fewer laws, not more laws. We could go back to start with 10, and I think we start all over again. We might have more respect for the law if there were fewer, and there are laws that almost all of us could agree upon, and that they weren't. A lot of them are socioeconomic laws that are hard to understand. Like everybody should have insurance when they drive their car, without a doubt. I mean, that you should be insured, but wouldn't it be great to have a product that if you didn't have it, you would go to jail? Wouldn't that be a great? I mean, I would love to invest in that company that had a product that if you didn't have it, you're going to end up in the jail. Well, that's what we do with people that don't insure their cars, right? They end up in jail for driving around without insured cars. So would that product be more expensive or less expensive if you had to go to jail? That you ended up in jail if you had that product, if you didn't have it. So of course, the expense would go up because gotta have it, right? And so when you look at traffic enforcement, it does fall predominantly on people that don't have money, right? They got the crappy car, they got the car that with a cracked windshield, they got the car with the tail light doesn't work, and all that's bad. You need to have brake lights at work. You need to have a windshield you can see through. You need to have insurance on your car. You need all those kinds of things. But percentage-wise, the guy with the brand new Land Rover, he's got insurance, and he doesn't get stopped by the police. He didn't have cracked windshield or no tail lights, etc. He's got a brand new one. So my concern is that rather than really promoting public safety in a lot of our traffic laws, we're not concentrating on the real things we should. Drunk driving, speeding, reckless driving, those kinds of things are important, and we need to concentrate on enforcing those that behavior.
How important is just the step of getting the right people into the force and not having it's a problem when you have officers leaving and not enough people applying. What do you do then? But how important is it just to keep out the wrong people, the people who are going to go rough people up just because they enjoy it, and get in the right people who have the attitude of, hey, I'm trying to make people safe here, keep people out of trouble, keep people from getting hurt. So is that the key step? Is the hiring step, or is it more of, can you train them once you get them, or how do you make it work?
It's quite difficult, and as one of the Peel's principles that I mentioned earlier was, ask their neighbors about them. Size up the officers by asking their neighbors about them and what kind of person they are, and that's really true. You really need to do that kind of background. So you have to go to their neighbor's house and ask them, what is this fellow really like when he's or she is off duty, and he recognized that very early on. And so really the background investigation of making certain that these people don't have some kind of abusive background, but it's really, really difficult to screen those out, as we've seen throughout our, on the news all the time. You see there are officers that are lose it, and I've lost it before too. I mean, I've had bad days also, but to try to change the people that come into the business with predetermined ideas about race and about their authority, those kinds of things is extremely difficult to weed out. And then on top of that, you have the police academy, which institutionalizes officers' behavior, and it's really hard for these institutions to change quickly. Police work is a conservative business. We tend to look at things that have worked in the past, and we're resistant to change. So you see that happening when the person becomes institutionalized into the agency, what they're rewarded for, and it's formalized in the police academy, and then they get into the field training officer, and it's a little bit more less formalized. And then eventually you end up in the culture itself, and it becomes more informal. But you want to be respected and honored by your peers, and these are the people that your safety depends on when you're out there in the street, and so you want to be like them, and you want them to like you, and so all that's very difficult, and it's hard to change. And in certain agencies, it's worse than in others. But there's a few things that I think is really true. First off, the police force tends to reflect the community they serve. You have a smart community, a lot of educated people. People are decent, basically decent and friendly with each other. You'll find the same thing occurs in their police force. And likewise, if you have a nasty town with nasty people that are either bigoted or have been forced into some kind of situation where they don't like each other, or foreigners much, or people from the outside, you're going to have a police force that represents those values as well. So that's something that I think is universal in the business. And then the police academies really need to be carefully analyzed. When I was started in the business, you didn't go to the police academy for a year. That obviously has problems, but they just basically put you out in the street and let you, are you going to make it or not? But they got a chance to look at that person and see if they really liked him before they went into that institutional setting. But unfortunately, then they learn by themselves, and that there might be some problems there. I went to a police academy graduation over the weekend. One of my officers was graduating, and it's a good academy. It's a rural academy, and I think they really try to teach the right things. But I noticed in every graduation, I've been to a lot of them, that there's always an award, different awards given. And one of the awards was for the best shooter, a person who learned to be the best shooter in the class. And when that award was presented to him, they went, "Hey, good going, guy. You did a great job. Oh, look at that! Slap him on the back. Oh, you're so great. You're the best shooter." And then they had another award for the person who was the best driver, and that's usually done on kind of a high-speed track, and it's pursuit driving, but it's also defensive driving to a degree. And the same thing, hey, he was the best, you're the best driver, and that's so great, you did that. And then and it was the lady that I sponsored to go to the one of my deputies to the academy, received the highest academic award for being the best student. And everybody went, "Hey, good work." And that was all she got. It was like, well, half-ass clap. So it just, I look at that and go like, that there's something wrong with this picture. Another academy had they made T-shirts during the class to work out in, and the T-shirt said something along the lines of poke them in the eye and do something else. Meaning, and it was for their arrest control. And this guy had taught a particular technique that when you really got in a bad fight, you should have this particular maneuver. And the class took to it and thinking it was funny to say, have a T-shirt, shoot him in the head, poke him in the eye, or something like that. And the academy director at the time, who's not there anymore, didn't realize how terrible that would be if newspaper or public came in and took photographs of the cadets working out with that T-shirt on. Academies have some issues, and we need to watch them carefully and make sure they're teaching the right thing. One thing that I did when I was in the police academy, and this is at the State Patrol Academy, everybody in the state used to go to the same academy except for like Denver and Arvada. Everybody in the 70s went to Camp George West, where the state police, the State Patrol Academy is. And we had a lot of State Patrol instructors. And but we had one section, the academy was only 5 weeks long then. Now it's 20 weeks long or something. But it was 5 weeks long, and we had a troupe of actors come in and play act either victims, not suspects, but victims, people that had something to report, people that were complaining about something. And it was a real eye-opener on them playing these victims. And you were told you had to solve this particular problem without using your legal authority. Pretend you're not an officer, but you had to go solve the problem that this particular actor or actress had and solve it without using police authority. That was a really good exercise. That was really good learning process to go like, all right, how do I do it just as Bill? Just if I was Bill, how would I solve this particular problem? It might be just a parking problem. This guy's so mad at me. He's parked behind my car, so I can't get out. I'm going to be late for work, and I can't find the guy. How do you resolve this problem? Do you tow away the car? No, you can't do that because you're not a police officer. So what do you do to get this person, get this neighborhood dispute in this apartment building resolved without using your authority? And that's good exercise. They don't teach that anymore.
Yeah, it seems like they need an award for the person who can best diffuse a mental health crisis or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what we need. That person is the person we need to be slapping on the back and going like, you solved this particular problem. And we should spend a long time dealing with that. It's interesting also, we do it in a very short period of time. We recruit people, we put them in the academy, we get them out on the field training program, and we expect them to know what they're doing relatively shortly. And I have a friend who is a police officer in Germany, and he decided at his young age, 18, he wanted to go in the police. So they went to college. They have a policeman's college that he goes to for 4 years before he can be allowed to go out and work as a police officer. So he's there in there for 4 long years, and they are fit. They're in good shape. They know arrest control. They know how to diffuse situations. They spend a lot of money on their peace officers before they're even on the street. And whereas we don't spend anything, nothing like that, a fraction, small fraction of that in our training. And then in our reoccurring training, it's doubtful how an 8-hour class. I'm scheduled for one next week. We have to do it's anti-bias training. It's required by the state now. There's certain curriculum required by the state to be recertified in every year. And it's probably a good thing to discuss, but I really question whether in 8 hours you can change some kind of fundamental, internal thing in somebody to say, oh, I'm thank God I'm no longer biased after an 8-hour training class, right? I mean, that's pretty incredible thought in my mind. But maybe you can do it in a 4-year program. If you're going like, this is one of our goals, you're going to come out of here with no bias about gender, about sexual orientation, about race, about occupation, etc. I'm not saying that the police in Germany are perfect. I have no idea what they're like, but this guy had a tremendous training program that we don't even come close to.
You mentioned a story about Don Coram to me. I thought you could relate that, how you came to know Don Coram.
Paul Haining, the young man in Placerville, was our only Vietnam War casualty. And Placerville, those who don't know, obviously, are just a little tiny town of maybe 100 people. Not truly even a town, just a place in our county. And I lived there for many years. And one day I was taking one of my kids down. I'd never been to the Placerville Cemetery, but I saw Paul Haining's grave in there, and it said, his date of death, 1969 or 1970 in the Republic of Vietnam. And I thought, oh, geez, here's this kid who came from Placerville, and he's kind of here in this forgotten cemetery, in this forgotten grave. His parents lived in Placerville, and they had moved on. When he was in Vietnam, he called home one day, and in Placerville, they didn't have they only had party lines in those days. Even when I lived there, they only had party lines, and his parents didn't answer, so the neighbor picked up the phone, and he said, I'm going to Vietnam tomorrow, and he was trying to get home his parents, and it never was able to connect with that with his parents. But he went to Vietnam and was killed, and so I contacted Don, and they're redoing the little bridge in Placerville, and it was like it's 100 yards bridge. It goes over Leopard Creek, and but they were expanding the bridge, and I asked him, I said, it would be great if we could get this little bridge named after Private Paul Haining. And so he said, yeah, I'll forward that bill. And so he did. And we have that bridge named there. And he came to the ceremony. So that was good. That was our only Vietnam War veteran, or lost Vietnam War veteran. So anyway.
I think Coram is now a state senator.
Yes, he was. I think he was a representative then. You're right.
Yeah. And now he's running in a primary season for U.S. Congress. We'll see how that works out for him.
Yeah, I like Don. I think he's a very reasonable guy, and a guy who definitely works across the aisle, and seems like a human being to me. A guy who's very approachable.
So I hear you went to the Nile recently. What was that about?
Well, a friend of mine about over a year ago contacted me and said, I've been reading about these sailboats that sail up the Nile. And I was trying to get a group together to go on that. So a group of us, I think there were 24 of us all together, and together with 6 children, a couple of my grandchildren, a couple of my youngest son and his girlfriend, and my oldest daughter and her husband and her couple of kids, and a whole group of people that we know chartered this sailboat. And it's like a sailboat that looks like something out of Cleopatra. No motor, and you have an Egyptian crew, which they're just great people, and we were able to sail up the Nile. And I didn't know much about the Nile, but or the Egyptian history, but I always wanted to see the pyramids and the different ruins. And it was amazing to be able to see it from a boat on the Nile, slow moving boat on the Nile, because we could pull over anywhere and tie up and go walk into the ruins that might not be so popular with the tourists. So you can just see them there. And it was very interesting. The interesting part about the Nile is it flows north into the Mediterranean from Lake Victoria, like, I don't know, 6,000 kilometers or something, clear through Africa and then through Egypt, but it flows north. And then the prevailing winds from the Mediterranean are south. And that's what really allowed the culture to flourish so well. First, they had the fertile valley of the Nile, which is really only about a mile on either side of the Nile, very thin strip. And they also had this method of sailing up and down the river, because you could sail with the prevailing winds southbound on the river against the current, and then turn around and come down with the current. And that enabled the Egyptians to do amazing architectural feats by tying all these boats together and putting great columns on them that weighed tons upon tons, and moving them around and building these incredible buildings that are so well preserved to this day, just because of the climate, and some of them have been covered in sand for years, et cetera. So it was a fascinating trip. The Egyptian people were great. They a lot of very moving experiences. We were in the largest mosque in Cairo one day, and a imam came out just before the prayers. I think they're at 11. They're 4-5 times a day, I guess. And he came out and was really enjoyed the children that were with us. And then he said, I'll say the morning prayers just for you alone in this huge Islamic mosque. And it was very moving, to hear him call out the morning prayers without any microphone or anything, just him reading the Quran from the mosque. So there are a lot of interesting experiences like that. I really enjoyed the Egyptian people. They were so great to us, and it was a really fun trip. I would urge anybody who has a chance to do that to definitely get a chance to go to Egypt.
Back home, what's your favorite thing about living in Telluride?
Yeah, I think it's a really healthy community, and I enjoy the smallness of it. I enjoy being able. I live right in the town of Telluride, and so I enjoy being able to walk wherever I want to go, or ride a bicycle where I want to go. Unfortunately, my office, I have to drive to my office. It's several miles out of town, but I enjoy being in a smaller community, although the community changes a lot. There's a lot of new people all the time, but that also has made it a very unique place to live. At one point, we were the 8th highest educated county in the nation. There are a lot of people that were dropping out of society that were highly educated or had made a lot of money and had moved to Telluride, and that makes it for a very interesting and dynamic community. We have great schools here. We have great recreational opportunities. It's really easy to stay fit, and I think as a long police career as mine is, it's probably going to be 50 years. I'm going to. I think that's important. It's important to stay fit throughout your career, and exercise regularly. It's beautiful. You can go skiing, mountain biking. I really enjoy mountain biking, so it's something I can do right outside my my door, and it doesn't involve a commute and all that kind of stuff. So it's really nice to be able to live in a small town. It was great for the kids growing up there too, and I have a couple of grandchildren growing up there now, and so it's a great place to great healthy community and lifestyle there in Telluride.
What's next on your agenda, either personally or at the sheriff's office?
Our latest thing is I have a friend of mine who started out as a deputy sheriff in Florida, and was changed into doing some private business, and now is a really wealthy man, and owns almost his own airline. I mean, he's been very successful, and he has decided to. He told me last year, Bill, I'm going to buy you a helicopter. He has a big house here in Telluride. He says, I think San Miguel County needs a helicopter, so I'm going to buy you a helicopter. And I thought that was kind of I thought he was just having a moment, and I said, that's a great offer. Thank you. And then I had a friend who was at an Airbus show. Airbus is a helicopter maker. And they were talking, and he's from Montrose, and he said, "Oh, Montrose, well, that's near Telluride. I know we're building their helicopter right now." And so my friend wasn't just joking, and so now we have that's coming later on this month, and I'm really am excited about that because once again, one of our duties is search and rescue, and we're going to have that platform to conduct our missions. It's a high performance helicopter. It the same model landed on the top of Everest. So it'll be our 14,000 peaks will be low altitude for this particular aircraft. And I'm looking forward to be able to do our search and rescue mission with a lot better timeline than we currently have. And also the same thing goes with wildfire suppression, be able to see those wildfires quickly, hopefully when they're small still, and get the proper crews in there to take care of that. So that's a something I hope is successful. And so that's one of the things I'm working at. I'm also involved in an assessment program for the sheriff's office right now. We hired a police expert to come in and assess our sheriff's office and to see what we can do better, make sure that we're up to date in our procedures and in our equipment and our all the new changes that have gone on in peacekeeping. Make sure that we're staying up to date on that. I'm looking forward to his report. He's interviewing everybody in the agency, and all of our employees, and several people in other agencies, and the community at large. So it'll be an interesting report that I think every agency should have done every once in a while. Somebody from the outside come in, a real professional person who's known to assess problem agencies. I don't think we're a problem agency, but if we have that kind of overview, I think it's good for someone, especially someone like me who's been in office for so long. I don't want to have blinders on and not see that there's something that's we could be doing better.
Well, good for you. That sounds great.
Mm.
Well, I think that's all I had. So I'll thank you for your service. I'll wish you good luck in the upcoming election. And thanks a lot for coming on to the podcast.
Hey, Ari, it was my pleasure. It's always fun. And I hope to see you in person someday. Come over to Telluride, or maybe next time I'm down there. And you should have plugged the book too. I mean, maybe we'll get a sale or two after all these years.
I'm sure it's still available. Drug War Addiction on Amazon. I'm sure you can find it there.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. All right, Ari, it was a real pleasure. Have a good day.
Hey, you too. Thanks a lot. This has been the Self and Society podcast. For more, please see Self and Society at Substack.